the Transition Scout SBG. It's a 150 front, 130 rear, party in the woods. I had been curious to ride the Scout for a while now, but I was left with no other option to demo one within a 4-hour radius. I've been on a V15010 for the last few years, but I've been demoing quite a few newer bikes lately.
Whoa, damn.
So I kind of thought I had an idea of what the Scout had to offer. That was, well, just the first thing I'd get wrong. Like James May boxer cars designed for the Nürburgring, bikes designed for the Pacific Northwest indeed have a unique character. While I dream of having steep rock rolls just a fire road pedal away, the reality is, we're lucky when the elevation crosses 1,000 feet here, and most of the rocks end up scattered across the trail, not ones you can ride down. Sure, we do have some cool rock features you can find, but that makes up a very small percentage of the total riding in the Northeast. Bike Mag recently called the bike an undercover enduro bike, and I felt like that term really hits home with this. I would definitely have taken this bike in an enduro race, smash on the way down and just cruise back up. I thought I had GeoCharge figured out. For the past few years, I could find a bike with a reach in the 420 range and an effective top tube of around 600 to 610, and found it generally to be comfortable. Then C-tube angles started getting steeper. I noticed that longer reach numbers were starting to feel okay. I had ridden a Ripmo, which had a 446 reach and a 603 top tube, and that felt comfortable. While a Giant Trance 29 in large, with a 462 reach and a 632 top tube, felt a bit on the big side. Looking at the Transition SBG GeoChart, I saw numbers that I felt I'd be comfortable with. 450 reach, 603 top tube, but why did this bike feel so short when sitting on the saddle and just pedaling around? Let's dive into it. I've been reading a lot about C-tube angles lately. It has been discussed on a lot of podcasts like The Path on Mountain Bike Radio, where the host Nate has been quoted as saying, "I need a steep C-tube angle because I climb steep shit." And this really hit home in the first couple rides on this bike. I had to break out the tape measure to see what I was dealing with, because on flat terrain and mild climbs, I was not feeling comfortable. When I sat on the bike, I was naturally trying to put my butt on the very back of the saddle, and was already slammed as far back on the rails as it would go. What I found was that there was almost a 1-inch difference between the center of my bars and the center of my seat post on this Transition Scout. A full 1 inch. That's a frame size of most bikes. I happen to be riding two trails which have a lot of steeper, punchy climbs, and the bike was actually feeling very good on those. But when I took it to my home loop, it felt like I was using a lot more energy to go less distance. So, were the charts wrong? Using my tape measure, I looked to verify the numbers the chart had, just to be sure I didn't actually have a small frame. But they were correct. It was a medium spec, but when you take the measurements from the top of the headset, those numbers don't change as much as when you measure them from your seat to your bars. At saddle height, a few degrees of C-tube angle can really make a big difference. I got to ride the V3 5010 in both medium and large, which after my Scout experience, I was questioning which one I would fit on. And it was confirmed, the large did indeed feel better. Now, having a steeper head tube angle, the 5010, even in medium, is about a half-inch longer than the Scout when you're in the seated position, and within range where I could just adjust the saddle to get me to a decent position. But the kinematics on the large just felt right. The bike still didn't feel too big, like that large Trance did. Transition was at our bike festival, but I ran out of time to try and get a ride in on the Scout in the large size.
Alright, we good?
I've had this bike for over a month now, and took it to various different types of trails. And if you ask the question, does the bike pedal well? I'm gonna have to say, it really depends on what kind of bike you're coming from. If you're coming from an XE focused bike, you're probably not gonna get excited to pedal this around, until it gets good and steep. If you're on a trail or enduro style bike, you'll probably find it as an improvement. Overall, I feel like it pedals okay, but I do feel like I've done more work to cover the same distance compared to what I'm used to. My 5010 felt like it carried speed easier over longer distances, but all that changes when the bike is pointed up or down. I've been playing with sag a lot. While the recommended 33 to 35% I think gives the best feeling downhill, going a bit higher can help transfer the power from the pedals to the ground a bit more effectively. Now, my bike came with a DVO Topaz, while the bikes are spec'd with the Fox DPX2, so I can't say if the Fox might be a little bit more supportive at the suggested sag range versus that DVO. I have tried the DVO with various volume spacer configurations. With this shock, you can add spacers with positive and negative chambers, in addition to being able to set pressures in the piggyback chamber. In the end, the progressiveness of the frame allows me to run less volume spacers and still have plenty of bottom out resistance. How well this bike handles bigger hits is the reason I've spent so much time and effort trying to make it pedal like I hoped it would. So what is this SBG all about? Transition called speed balance geometry. Longer, lower, slacker, we've all been hearing this for the past few years. But recently, we've seen an aggressive change in mountain bike geometry. While on paper, it might look like an incremental change, a few degrees here, a couple centimeters there, but to put this in perspective, my 2015 5010 was a large, and in 2018, the Medium Scout has a 1 inch longer reach, while being 1 inch shorter from the saddle to the bars, 3 degrees slacker with a 2 inch longer wheelbase, all while retaining the same wheel size and only 10 more millimeters of front travel. Now last year, I spent a good amount of time on a downhill bike with 200 millimeters of travel, coil suspension, with 26 inch wheels. And I'm actually feeling more confident on the Scout with the same bike park trails compared to that bike. I bring this up because I feel like the geometry is the star here. Transition has done a really good job with the rear suspension. This is truly the first bike I've experienced that rides like a longer travel bike. I feel like the rear of this bike could easily be mistaken for 150 millimeters of travel. And a lot of the confidence that comes from this bike is derived from the front end. How this bike enters a corner and how much traction it has, using the reduced offset fork and the longer front end, is really inspiring. Usually with a 65-degree head angle, you get a choppy steering effect. At slow speeds, the front end can want to lift while doing technical type climbing. The SBG brings the reduced offset fork to the mix, which does an amazing job of counteracting both of these feelings. I will say that in slow speed corners, it doesn't feel as sharp as an XE bike, but you quickly adapt, and I found that the setup feels more like a 29 where the bike wants to take a longer arc around a corner, but is really planted once you lean it over on the side knobs. The steeper seat angle is also a play here, because it's putting more of your weight forward while climbing. There's definitely a speed where this bike comes alive. I've sent a couple things deep, come up short a few times, and it has just brushed off all those mistakes. My old 5010 was honestly a really good do-everything bike, but I always wanted to handle some of the bigger hits better. And while I was hoping the Scout would be like a 5010 that hit the gym, it's honestly kind of more like a mini Nomad. It punches well above its weight, but you have to work to get it there. I haven't found that balance that makes it fun on my local trails. If I was closer to a downhill park, I could probably justify having it around. Everything on this bike is overbuilt. The rear end is really stout, and the only time I felt it bottom out was when I accidentally ran half of my normal rear shock pressure. You know, not on purpose.
Whoa, damn.
One issue you will find is that the offset seat tube doesn't let you have a long insertion, so it's kind of hard to put a long dropper in this bike. A trend I did notice on both transition bikes was a very low feeling bottom bracket, paired with more pedal strikes than I'm used to. I even learned a new thing, pedals catching the side of a trail while cornering. Now the static bottom bracket is the normal 334 millimeters, which is fairly common, but with a recommended 33 to 35% sag, you end up a lot closer to the ground than on other bikes. It would be cool to have seen a flip jib integrated into the shock here. It would definitely make this bike more versatile. To wrap up this review, let's recap the characteristics of this bike. First, rowdy AF. This bike loves speed, chunk, jumps, and drops. It's a mistake erasing hover bike. 2, it's a bit chunky itself. Even though 30-pound enduro bikes are the norm these days, this bike doesn't really hide its weight. But it's really stiff, and I think that's the point. Point 3. Made in the PNW. This bike was designed for the mountains, and it will get you to the top and let you go mock chicken back down. But if you don't live in the mountains, you might want another bike for more pedally trails. I know I do.